I just think it's this combination of cowardice and stupidity that has led the party to essentially take a very soft approach. I think it's been a fantastic event, a lot of energy here, and I think it's been very sort of important in the debate here in Britain of the future of the Conservative Party, how the Conservative Party has kind of failed to address cultural concerns, cultural conservatism, fighting back against what I call cultural socialism, wokeness in the education system, for example, but also failure to control immigration numbers, which are set to hit record highs. And a lot of the new ideas here, I think, are influencing the direction of what conservatism will be, perhaps after the Conservatives are defeated, which it looks like they will be, in a time of renewal. Where should the movement go? And I think that's probably what's struck me the most. It's basically conservatism that is focused on conserving the nation and its traditions. That's the one-line answer. Of course, we can then go deeper into it and look at the movement, National Conservatism, as organized by Yoram Hazony and by the people who signed up to this set of principles. And that is more of a, I would say, religious nationalism, and that's maybe one of the areas where some people in this conference have obviously different views on this. So we just heard David Starkey and a number of others, and I'd count myself in that category that would say, well, the most important thing is the nation. Now, you can take a religious approach. I tend to take more of an approach that says I still think religion should be a private matter. But ultimately, but there are many different, it's a big tent. There are people here who are, more religiously inclined, people who are more post-liberal, others who still subscribe, as I do, to the idea of procedural liberalism, and who think that we haven't yet begun to use the many tools liberal democracy offers us to fight back against some of the trends that we've seen in the past decade or two. They've basically been asleep at the wheel. A lot of them either don't understand it or they don't care about it. And I think that the second is probably more important, is that most of them are economic business liberals who are inspired by Margaret Thatcher, who came into the party that way, or they're about status and they know the Tories are in power most of the time, so if they want to be a member of the establishment, that's a route in. So they haven't prioritized it, and they've allowed the teachers to teach critical race and gender theory, the museums, the National Trust, all these publicly funded bodies to push decolonization, diversity, equity, all of these things, and they haven't done anything about it because, number one, they don't care, or number two, they're too scared. If something comes with a packaging that says inclusion, they think, oh, well, that's good, and if I go against it, the press is going to call me a racist, and I don't know what to say at that point. And so I just think it's this combination of cowardice and stupidity that has led the party to essentially take a very soft approach. And even where they have actually tried to do something like on preventing indoctrination in schools, they have again been extremely naive, not been willing to challenge the educational establishment. So, for example, they issued guidance on Black Lives Matter being a political movement, but they didn't issue guidance on critical race theory being political. And so they can still do critical race and gender because they didn't specify that those things are political because they were too scared or they were too stupid to do that. And that's an example of what I'm saying, is that time and time again, they just haven't had the fortitude, the stamina, the follow-through to actually begin to challenge these policies. It's just not a priority for them. And until that changes, so I use the example of Ron DeSantis and other politicians now in America who are doing this, and it's popular because most people oppose these things, but you have to show the public exactly what is being said and taught, and you have to raise the profile of that issue by talking it up, and then you've got to execute by instituting bureaus and policies that can actually ensure that these things are not done in the name of the public and are not funded. That's tough, and it takes a lot of political capital, and right now that just hasn't been the case with the Conservative Party. And so I do think there will be ructions. It's going to be either a faction is going to have to take over the party, or a new alternative third-party movement is going to have to challenge the Conservatives and force them onto that ground. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things they can do. I mean, there are a few problems. One is the free speech problem, and here in Britain we have the Higher Education Free Speech Bill, which I have been involved in. I think that's great for protecting against no platforming, for example. But the other problem, of course, is the self-censorship, which comes mainly from political discrimination and institutional bias. I think governments could, for example, tell universities you must be publicly neutral in all your statements, that anyone who's in an administrative capacity cannot take a political position. I think they could make political discrimination part of the anti-discrimination regime. I think they could target the funding that goes to diversity and equity initiatives, ban diversity statements, all the things that are occurring, let's say, in the United States, Republican states. And then also they could try and do what, again, DeSantis and others are doing, which is to publicly fund countercultural centers within each university, and to say every university has to set one of these things up just to bring a bit of viewpoint diversity into the system, which is right now completely monocultural. Well, I mean, populism can be a left-wing thing, Maduro, and can be a right-wing thing. So populism itself has no content. It's just about privileging the people against the elite, and the different definitions of who the people are. It could be the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, or it could be the people against the financial elite. But conservatism is a specific, has some content. It's about something you want to conserve. It might be national traditions. It might be the ethnic composition, which is one national tradition. Even if that's going to change somewhat, you might want to slow down the rate of change. So that was a point I made in my talk. These are things that conservatives are focused on. And now you can have conservative, if the elites have checked out of doing the conservative things, which generally they have, particularly the cultural elites, then it falls more to the wisdom of the people or the mass of the population to actually try and conserve those traditions. And I think that's the position that we find ourselves in. Yeah, I think so, because what's happened is the elite institutions have been captured by a sort of cultural socialism, or at the very least, a more kind of globally oriented liberalism, which is individual-centered and really is all about diversity and change. So I think, the only real way to challenge that is to harness the sentiments and attachments of the majority of the population to resist that. Now, it's going to take, obviously, some intellectual leadership, so some elites are going to have to be involved. But yeah, this is really where the resistance is going to be to this elite high cultural agenda, which has really been building for a century. I mean, you can look at modern art and architecture as the beginning of this, and eventually that becomes dominant. You can't be a respected architect or an artist in the high culture and not be a modernist. You can't be a traditionalist, right? And in the same way, we're seeing that now, getting into education, getting into every institution that, So.
Oh. All right. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Bjorn.